Hi, everybody. I'm Reverend Catie Scudera,
And I'm Jenna Crawford.
and we're the ministers serving First Parish in Needham Unitarian Universalist. We'd like to welcome you to our November couch conversation. Each month at First Parish, we have a different monthly theme that we integrate into our Sunday services and Lifespan RE programs and small groups. And this month, our theme is covenant and right relationship, which is it's a big theological category for us as Unitarian Universalists. So we've got a lot of stuff on the docket for that. But one part of particularly right relationship in building a covenant, maintaining a covenant that I've been thinking about is that covenants and right relationship can be challenging in the world we live in because all of us have different amounts, so to speak, of societal privilege based on our race or our gender or sexual orientation or class or ability. So there's that aspect, and each of us in our various roles have different amounts of power. I know, Jenna, you and I were both just reading the Commission on Appraisal, the UUA, there it is, Unlocking the Power of Covenant. You were really just reading it, just off camera. And so that, obviously, that book talks a lot about covenant and the exercise thereof. And there's a whole section about different kinds of power that you can have. Referent power, which is there's high esteem or identification with a leader who acts in certain ways. There's expert power. Do you have particular specialization or expertise? Legitimate power, which is just being in a leadership position. Reward power, able to grant rewards. And coercive power, able to coerce or punish people. And each of us in our roles in society have different amounts of that kind of power. And that can really impact whether a relationship is, this is very binary, but right or wrong, or is somewhere in the middle. It puts in a lot of complications because in a relationship, there's usually an unbalance of power. And as ministers, it's something we talk about a lot in these modern times. How do we build healthy relationships with our congregations, given that as ministers, we have expert power and referent power and legitimate power, and in some cases can turn that into a coercive power or a reward power, even though we're really not supposed to. But it's a power we could wield. We're just not supposed to. No.
Yeah, and so I've been reading recently as part of my studying this year, the UUMA guidelines and code of conduct and professional standards of ethics, and a really big emphasis of it, sort of rightly so, is that ministers are not supposed to have like special relationships with congregants, whether that's romantic or platonic. There's actually a specific line in that big document of UUMA guidelines that says, as a minister, I covenant to make sure that I'm getting my emotional, romantic, spiritual needs met elsewhere, because it's unethical to even if you're not realizing that that's what you're doing, or especially if you're not realizing that's what you're doing, to try to get that from your congregation, because there are power asymmetries there. And it's really important to always consider power asymmetries and in kind of micro relationships, like a minister and a congregant, and macro relationships, like when we enter into treaties with other countries or like things like that. The other place I see this operating, since I just graduated from seminary in the spring, is universities. It's like the minister-parishioner relationship, the sort of TA or teaching assistant, teaching fellow, or professor-student relationship. There's power involved, and so it's not like it can operate like sort of any peer-to-peer relationship, because there's the other kinds of power that we talked about that ministers have: referent, expert, legitimate. But also in universities, there's the reward power, so the ability to grant or withhold something people want, and coercive power, the power to coerce or punish, in assigning grades or allowing someone to pass a class. So yeah, just remembering that these do change the nature of relationships, and we really have to be, if we're not continuously aware of them, they can have a negative impact on relationships, and we're out of right relationship when we're not consistently checking those powers and privileges.
Right. Yeah, and it is I think about when I was in seminary 1,000 years ago, I did have a professor who he and the TA would split the class after the main lecture for discussion period. The TA would just have a discussion period with that half of the class. I was in the half of the class with the professor, and he would take us out to dinner every week. Like, we'd go to the same place. He would get us, he was like, get whatever you want. It's on my expense. I loved it. I was a grad student, so I was like, thank you. I love getting food. But thinking about it in retrospect, it was very uneven application of time with the professor and what he was doing for us. I don't think it impacted anybody's grades, but I know that people who were in the other section had it's a very legitimate jealousy that we got this not only special time with the professor, but also that he was taking us out to dinner. So it was complicated. It's one of those kind of power dynamics that nothing uncouth happened with the whole class out with that half a class out at dinner, but it still created a weird dynamic within the class because some of us got this special treatment, which is basically that the professor was hungry and fed the rest of us. And then the others just got regular treatment. So it's very challenging in these group dynamics to figure out, well, if I want to do something that is kind or special towards someone, how does that impact the rest of the group? Whether it's a university professor or a minister. And I've also been thinking a lot about covenant going into this month with my own family. Because now we have a small child. She's going to be 19 months here in November. And we don't have an explicit covenant with her. And she can say a lot of words at this point, but she's really not at the level of building a family covenant, which I know is actually very common in UU families, is that they create a family covenant together. And I'm sure we'll do that at some point when she's slightly more verbal and this part of her brain is better developed. But because this part of her brain isn't very developed, I try to remind myself of the really severe power inequity between us. It actually helps me understand her behavior more and be more patient because we control basically everything in her entire life. Like, she can't even, we lock cabinets so she can't get into them, which makes sense. Like, it's a safety issue. It's we don't want all of our pots and pans broken issue. So it's something we have to do, but I have to remember that must be extremely frustrating for her, that she wants to look at things and then she's not allowed to. Or this is the food that she has the option to eat. She doesn't have this, everything is laid out for her. She doesn't have much of her own authority and ability to do what she wants. And thinking about the dynamics in the family, to remember that I'm in a position of power over her. And that means that I have to extend to her a lot of grace and understanding. As she doesn't have the capacity to extend that back towards me. She will one day, but to just recognize that it's actually frustrating being a small child. There's so much you both can't do physically because you actually can't do it, but also so much that you're not allowed to do. And to give her the ability to make choices that make sense for her. Like they're getting to pick her, the t-shirt she wears every day. That's something, I pick the range of t-shirts. She can pick what she wears, so that she can have a little bit of say in her own little person life. And that kind of dynamic does continue the whole life long and becomes very challenging, actually, if a parental figure, a grandparental figure, or a caregiver is getting older and suddenly that kind of role is switched. You see a lot of friction in families over that because they're not accustomed to that flip in the power dynamic. it illustrates how important it is just to recognize it, just to know like, oh, right, like some of us in this family have more power than others. And those who have power and privilege need to exercise it mindfully. It's not like I can't give the toddler equal power to me.
Right.
That wouldn't be good for anybody. But I can be mindful about how I exercise the very extreme power that I do have. And I am curious for everybody who's watching, like, where do you see power dynamics coming up in your life? I'm actually noting, Jenna, we're not even getting into that. I'm the chief of staff, so I have to be mindful about my power dynamics with the rest of the staff, including you. I like write recommendations to you for your ordination exam and things like that. I'm curious for people who are watching where they see power dynamics come up, whether it's in the workplace and how that impacts right relationship, or in their families with older members of their families, younger members of their families, people who are siblings or cousins, or in their schools or in their congregations. Like, where do you see these kind of power dynamics come up, and how does it affect right relationship between you and other people? And so if you have any thoughts about it, you can feel free to write to me and Jenna. Our email addresses are at uuneedham.org, or you can comment on wherever you're watching this video, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook. We'd be really happy to hear from you. And we hope that this reflection on covenant and right relationship and differential power and privilege give you an insight as we go into the holiday season, and as more places are opened back up in what are hopefully the waning days of this pandemic. So you're starting to see more people again, being more mindful about where the power dynamics exist and how to still continue in right relationship. So we hope to hear from you soon, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, everyone.